Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. My name is Tom Luongo. It is Monday, June 19th, 2017. I want to begin by apologizing for not getting one of these out earlier. I fully intended to do so on Friday, but and this weekend was not going to be possible to get one out this weekend. So Friday was really the day. And did you ever have one of those days where you don't just wake up on the wrong side of the bed, but you wake up trying to get off the bed by straddling it? Friday was really bad, and I walked around in a daze for most of Friday. I don't mention this at all on these podcasts, but I've been working at an incredibly high rate for a couple of months now, and I think it finally backed up on me on Friday. And as you all know, as any of you know me personally, you know that I work like 7 days a week, and I rarely, if ever, take a day off. And even a day when I don't work, even when I consider what I consider a day off is to only work from like 6 a.m. until 2 p.m. and then not work for the rest of the day and take the rest of the afternoon off. And that to me is a day of rest. But Friday was one of those days. I think I wrote 4,000 words on Thursday. And then Friday, I had nothing left in the tank I couldn't even speak into a microphone and update charts. It was bad. I wound up like taking a nap on the couch for 2 hours. And so sorry about all that. So let's get to it. And of course, that's happening. A day like that happens exactly at the wrong time because everything's, in my mind, starting to go to hell in a handbasket. Let's start with, and all of this will be predicated on what we're going to talk about, the deteriorating relationship between the Russians and the Americans. Now, first off, I want to say, I don't know what, if any, control over any of this Donald Trump has. And my best read on this is that he has zero control now over his Secretary of Defense, that he has almost no control over the way the operations are being handled in Syria. And I think that we're getting to a point where it's pretty obvious that Defense Secretary Mattis and the people who are running the operation in Syria are incompetent. And I think that's what needs to be said. Last week on this podcast, if you go back and watch it, you'll note that I put up the map of Syria after the Syrian Arab Army made a major push to link up with the popular military forces on the Syrian-Iraqi border, which would be southeastern Syria and northwestern Iraq. This was a move described by General Mattis as unexpected. I don't know. I think every half-witted, second-rate geopolitical observer understood that was the plan of the Syrian army, that's what they needed to do, and that it was the whole purpose of the U.S. quote-unquote invasion of across Jordan into southern Syria was to stop this. And yet somehow the Syrian army was capable of pushing through and moving like 70 or 100 kilometers in a day and a half to make this happen, and to establish contact, and to establish now an encirclement or a cauldron, for all intents and purposes, around the desert. The response to this has been to escalate attacks on the Syrian army, encroachments into what the U.S. is calling agreed upon deconfliction zones, which is obviously nothing more than a U.S. unilaterally enforced no-fly zone. This culminated with the shooting down of an Su-22 over the weekend. A Syrian Su-22, not a Russian one. If it was a Russian one, nukes would already be flying. Personally, I've had about enough of it. But I understand from a geopolitical perspective that what's going on here is to see just how far the U.S. can push and try and get Putin and the Russians to react in such a way that we can claim that they're the bad guys and the aggressors in this. That's the game being played. Putin, on the other hand, is gathering evidence, mounting evidence that the U.S. are the aggressors in this, that they are not acting under the color of international law, they are creating international incident and international war crimes left and right, so that they can go to the UN and and get the U.S. labeled as the aggressor in Syria, at which point that will give the Russians every opportunity and every legal means, cover, whatever you want to call it, to drive the Americans out of Syria. And we will not have a diplomatic leg to stand on. We already don't have a diplomatic leg to stand on. We are only using our enormous position and throwing it around like a 900-pound gorilla. Definitely being outmaneuvered by Putin at every turn. The Russians have responded this morning by saying there is any more cooperation and coordination between the U.S. and the Russians to stay out of each other's way, and that the Russians will shoot down any any foreign asset flying in the skies where Russian planes are active, period. It does not say including Syrian army planes. That's the key. But it will allow now the Russians to fly sorties along with the Syrians and say, feeling froggy, take that leap. Every time that the Russians have made it abundantly clear that they will not tolerate any more aggression from the United States and back it up with their forces, the United States backs down. This has happened at least half a dozen times since they moved into Syria in October 2015. This all comes 5 days after the U.S. Senate decides that it's now a foreign policy body. Now, that's funny because the U.S. Senate is supposed to be a legislative body, a power granted to it by the Constitution that has ceded to the executive branch for at least the last 20 years, since the Clinton administration, choosing to not actually do any legislative work, but allowing presidents to legislate through executive order so that they don't have to go back to their constituents and say, see, I didn't vote for that nonsense. That's all the president's fault. And now they write a sanctions bill, literally written by John McCain, mind you, to expand the sanctions against Russia in order to target specific energy contracts or energy projects within the European Union, now thinking that they're also a foreign policy setting agency for the EU on top of the United States president, because it's constitutionally, that's his job. So now here we are with a United States Senate who won't actually legislate like they're supposed to, but now is conducting foreign policy on behalf of a president it doesn't like. The Republicans are the problem here, not the Democrats, in the larger sense. The Democrats want to continue to hang Trump with ephemera and bullshit, for lack of a better term. They keep this going for as long as possible to get into the 2018 election cycle and try not to get their butts handed to them. That's their goal. That's the only game they have. It's the Republicans you have to watch out for. They're the ones who are going to impeach Trump, if he's going to get impeached at all. McCain wants Trump dead. McCain wants Putin's head on a platter. The man is an unhinged, uncrazed warmonger, wholly owned by the military-industrial complex in the U.S. deep state. Oh, and he's senile, too. Brexit talks begin today. Every time I open up Zero Hedge, I see another van being driven into a group of people, building being set on fire, people being knifed all across London. Now we're at the point where it's like those, when you watch, all of this stuff will stop the minute Theresa May steps down as Prime Minister. and Labor's allowed to take over. I really shouldn't have to draw any more dots than that. That sound like conspiracy theory to you? I don't know. But the EU wants Brexit scuttled. The globalists want Brexit scuttled. The leftist commentators at places like the Durin and others are now starting to posit that Jeremy Corbyn is the savior of the anti-globalist front. This is how lunatic these people are, because they actually believe that there's something different between an elbow patch wearing socialist like Corbyn and a cultural Marxist. True socialists are anti-globalist. No, they're not. That's nonsense. But this is what they believe. And that Corbyn, because he is, he's okay with Brexit. Publicly, he's okay with being anti-globalist. But Corbyn is anti-globalist in the same way that Bernie Sanders is. He's anti-corporatist, but that doesn't necessarily make him anti-globalist. Because true progressivism is about one-size-fits-all rights, egalitarian rights for everybody, defined by the people who are in power, defined by the progressives and not everybody else. So that means universal gun control. It means all the stuff that, it means, all this nonsense, which Putin, of course, stands athwart of. And anybody on both the left or the right or the libertarians or hardcore libertarians and hardcore authoritarians need to watch Oliver Stone's 4-hour Putin interviews to understand what you're dealing with. And I'll get back to that in a minute as to why it's so important. But it's very obvious that if they can't weaken Theresa May to the point where she just gives the EU whatever they want, which is to basically create a Brexit in name only, then they'll work to destroy the current sitting British government, install a Labour coalition, nominally headed by Corbyn, but you know that Corbyn's not going to stay in power. There's no way they're going to give that man the reins to 10 Downing Street. No way imaginable. And this is where Adam Gary at the Durin and Pepe Escobar and the rest of them are all completely insane. That's a wish fulfillment fantasy. It's like Bernie Sanders becoming president of the United States. It's a wish fulfillment fantasy. If you want to see what Corbyn will look like as prime minister, take one look at Bernie Sanders after the primaries. Here, Bernie, have a couple $100,000 and a couple of houses and shut up and get on the gravy train. Because that's the way it's going to go. And if Corbyn is allowed to be prime minister in name only in order to assuage the millennial vote, it'll be some second coming of Tony Blair that actually sets all the policy. And if he doesn't play ball, then they'll just get rid of him and put the second coming of Tony Blair in 10 Downing Street. And that's just the way it will work. And this is what they're trying to do with Trump by either neutering him or getting rid of him. The deep state is striking back, and they're striking back very, very hard. And in my mind, we're starting to we may be reaching the end of Act 2 if this is a movie, right? And the end of Act 2 is that point when everything looks awful and it can't look any worse. And you hear it in movies. How could things get any worse? It's literally like the signal that Act 2 just ended. And we're about to start Act 3. Or is about to end, and we're about to, then we see how things can get worse. They get worse, and then they get better, right? And, so if that's where we are, I want to know when things start to get better. Because from where I'm sitting, it's not getting better. The U.S. sanctions hit Gazprom very hard, in theory, but that won't matter, because what this is going to do, and what it's already doing, is it's actually working in Donald Trump's favor. After he alienated the EU and pissed them off by treating Merkel badly and, trying to get NATO to pay up and all of this stuff, right? And so now the John McCain wing of the Republican Party, the U.S. Senate, is now doubling down on that policy. But they hate Trump's policy for this, getting out of the Paris Accord, all that stuff. But this is actually more infuriating to them than all the other stuff that Trump did was. And so what will happen here is this will accelerate the EU attempting to build their own policy, their own foreign policy. Merkel will continue. Merkel will run on this until September. Okay, the Nord Stream expansion, Nord Stream 2 will not end because of these sanctions. As a matter of fact, I bet you book this, the EU will go out of its way to ensure that any quote-unquote fines that are levied by the United States over financing Nord Stream 2 will be bound up in court or whatever, will not be paid because they can't. It's insanity. But that's the way we're going. Okay, and interestingly enough, about that sanctions bill, if you listen to the people not named John McCain who signed this bill, they didn't even realize. Like Bob Corker, who was the co-sponsor on the bill, didn't even realize that it affected existing pipeline projects. He just thought it was a good idea because he wanted to virtue signal to the world and to the rest of the Republican Party that he was ready to impeach Trump. It's like, we didn't. That's not what we. So you're going to have to give Trump the ability to negotiate here. We didn't want. They put provisions in that thing to tie his hands so that he couldn't lift sanctions against Russia without congressional approval. Which, frankly, I think on a strict constitutional read is unconstitutional. And obviously, Trump should not sign this thing as a fig leaf to Putin, no matter how bad it makes him look in the short run, because in the long run he will gain tremendous points and power, both with his base and both in the international community, as a man who understands the consequences of acting, of usurping your authority and smacking Congress down, which needs to be done in this instance. For once, Congress actually needs to be smacked down in usurping their authority, as opposed to delegating it to the president, which I find the most ironic part of the entire process. If you have not watched the Putin interviews yet, you absolutely need to. Sign up for Showtime for a month, watch them, then cancel. Do whatever you have to do. Okay, I think they're actually on YouTube. And then they're going to be airing on Russian television in a few days. So they'll be widely available very soon now. Okay. Originally, Stone was expected to make a 2-hour film, but the quality of the material was so high that he expanded it out to 4 hours. And the reason he was able to do this was because, as he told that jackass Stephen Colbert the other night, you attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. Because Colbert went after Stone for the clip that they showed, that he didn't follow up and ask a hard-hitting question. He just said, "Oh, that's nice. You just lied. Good night. We'll see you in the morning. We're all friends now." And Stone just looked at him and said, "Do you realize that this was a 2-year process? And that I was given unprecedented access to the Kremlin and Russian state, and Russian state assets, and in a look into Putin's life that has never been seen before. Do you think I would have gotten that had I been confrontational with the first question I asked him?" That's not what Putin. That Stone didn't say all that, but those are all implied in his very terse, in his very succinct response. You get more flies with honey than with vinegar. And as you watch, and Alexander Mercouris over at the Durin made a great point in an article about this yesterday, that you could see Putin open up over the course of these 4 interviews and give Stone information that he wouldn't have given him otherwise. And so we get a more complete picture of the man. We get a more nuanced picture of him and his and the way he prosecutes the way he goes through his and does his job and views his role and everything else. We've never gotten that otherwise. Now, you get it bits and pieces if you watch Putin in other forms where he's comfortable, where it's not confrontational. But these interviews were a revelation, and everybody in the United States should watch them, because everybody's life in the United States depends on our relationship at a governmental level with this man. Because Putin has taken it upon himself to be the point man, to challenge the United States' authority worldwide. That's why he's hated. But he's okay with that. He can take it. And there's a great moment in the first episode. And I think you might even be shown in some of the clips, with the promotional clips for these things that was on, where Stone asked him about, taking Crimea. It's like, why would you annex Crimea if you knew it was going to cause such a problem? Of course, Putin, the first thing he says was, look, we didn't annex Crimea. They voted to rejoin Russia, and we accepted them. This is, you call it an annexation, we don't. Which is right, by the way, the truth. And he said, understanding that, goes on a little bit to clarify the point about, I can't worry about what's being said about me overseas, and that at the end of the day, we have an old saying in Russia: those who are destined to be hanged do not drown. Let's get to the charts. All right. So last week, before we did this, last time I did this, I should have, like I said, I wanted to do one of these on Friday afternoon. I just couldn't get it to show you on Friday afternoon that we had set up for a 2-bar reversal on the weekly chart in gold, and that we're getting follow-through downside action this week. Support for gold at this point stands at 1247 or so. We're trading at around 1250, 1251. And then if that breaks, then further support lies at 1214, and then obviously we get down to like 1197, and then the 2016 low. But I'm not worried; those things aren't in play yet. There's plenty of support in between here and there, and the general bent of this chart is still very bullish. It's starting to curve off and starting to flatline, and we could see a very wide trading band come into play here between 1297 or 1300 on the upside, and 1215 to 1220 on the downside. And if that were to happen for the rest of the summer, that would actually be okay, because then that would actually tell you that the price of gold is becoming very stable between those two levels. Or it could be setting up as a prelude to a further drop. Okay, and that's what we need to worry about, and that's why it'll be important to see where gold stops in this correction. If it stops at this 1250 level, that's really, really good, because then we have a series of higher lows, not necessarily higher highs. We had that before. So low, higher high, higher low than this one, higher high than this one, higher low than that one, and then here we have the exact same high, and that's the problem. So if we don't get a move back down to 1214, which is the low here, then that would be bullish from that perspective. It's not overly bullish, but it's better than breaking or violating this 1214 level, and which would then give give gold another opportunity to try and push through 1300. It may take a third. At this point, it will take at least 3 attempts to break through 1300. We have 2 of them so far. We need a third one. The higher that gold bottoms out here, the higher the probability that we're going to get that third test of 1300 quicker in time. All right, the monthly chart, from a monthly perspective, we absolutely want to hold 1214. From a quarterly perspective, we definitely want to hold this low in February of around 1200. Okay, because while this wouldn't be necessarily any kind of reversal of this horrible washout here in Q4, it would be at the very least continuation of the uptrend since then. It's a weak uptrend, but better than no uptrend. Okay, but that being said, Silver's chart over basically the same time period doesn't look nearly as good. This was a very weak uptrend that was now broken by this 3-week washout here, and then we got a lower high, and now we have a series of low, high, lower low, lower high, lower low. For June, we want to hold in silver above 1606. That's the line in the sand. That's your that would keep things from imploding even further on the chart, on the longer term charts, on the monthly and the quarterly charts. The quarterly chart is already bearish thanks to a horrible Q4. Nothing here is telling us that there's any kind of rally waiting to be staged in silver anytime soon. Okay. If anything, silver is absolutely going to try and retest 1606. If it doesn't do that, that's great. But it may not, and it may not do that this month. It may take until July for that retest to happen. That would be good. But as it stands right now, we're only 45 cents away. There's 2 weeks to go. There's more than enough probability that we can get a drop back to 1606 this week, and between this week and next. So that's going to weigh on gold. And that's what we have to deal with in the precious metals. But you can see the difference between a safe haven asset and a non-safe haven asset yet. That's the takeaway. Silver's not ready to lead this new bull market. Therefore, there's not a bull market on the horizon yet. We need to see a massive reversal in the price of silver from a flight to quality or safe haven perspective. And we're not seeing that because of Bitcoin. And I made mention of this the last couple of times, and I'm going to continue to make mention of this. Bitcoin has become a haven, for safe haven, for capital outside of the global banking system, the global monetary system. It exists outside of it. It stands athwart it. That's why we've seen a massive influx of capital into cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin tripled in the last 2 months. It's getting toppy up here. We're very close to, we're getting closer to what looks like a 2-bar reversal, but because of this huge down spike last week, you can't really call this a reversal. Closing below this low is a reversal signal, because we've already had the reversal signal and the snapback, for Christ's sake. It's like it's already happened. You have to look at the daily chart to dial in. The weekly chart's just getting noisy now. But what I'll say is that there seems to be a bit of support here now in the 2450 to 2480 area, and that a close this week below that would portend that we could see another move back down to 2050. These are your two areas of support. There is nothing between 2450 and 2050 on the chart now. There's two weekly closing prices, there's a weekly closing price here and a weekly low here at these same levels. Notice just how noisy this stuff gets between $2,000 and $3,000. There wasn't a lot of trading happening. There wasn't a lot of volume in here. So this all has to be like worked out in people's minds. And so I think you're going to see a bit of choppy action. I'm not sure for how much longer in Bitcoin, but continue to watch it. And let's watch to see if we lose the 2450 area in the next couple of days. I don't know. Well, we'll just have to. It's a very fundamentally the chart. Bitcoin is going to continue to rise. Ethereum is going to continue to rise. Things got so out of whack in Bitcoin that then we started to see Ethereum rise, and then Ethereum hit $400, and then everybody pulled back, and now then they pulled back a little bit, and now Litecoin was one of the first Bitcoin alternatives. Is now rising in price, and doubled in price in 24 hours over the weekend on strong Korean and Japanese buying because of arbitrage value. Just simply that the ratio of Bitcoin to the Litecoin got to 100 to 1, which is not acceptable by by historical valuations at this point. So something had to give, and then Litecoin popped, $25 and is now trading at around 50. And Litecoin has a fundamental advantage over Bitcoin in that it can handle larger transaction volumes than Bitcoin can inherently within its blockchain. It was designed for that. It's got more liquidity. and a more flexible, not more flexible, just a greater capacity for transaction volume. It was like Bitcoin 2.0. Or really better put, Bitcoin 1.0, because Bitcoin is actually Bitcoin was 0.66 or whatever it was, 0.7. It was a beta or an alpha code that got out and went viral, and then other versions of that have been, the first group of coins after that were ones that, just took the basic framework and tried to make it better. Say, well, Bitcoin's 10-minute clearing time is too long, or the hashing algorithm is too restrictive. We can do mining by GPUs as opposed to this, and all this kind of stuff. And so they weren't fundamentally different coins. They were just, or fundamentally different code. They were just refinements of the original code. They're almost like Pareto, right? They're improvements. The differences are in like, not in kind. Ethereum is a different kind of coin, and that's why it requires a separate analysis. So Litecoin is a direct substitute for Bitcoin in that respect, while Ethereum is different. All right, so that's the situation in cryptocurrencies and all of your safe haven assets. We're starting to see asset rotation into U.S. equities in a serious way since the Fed rate hike. And I didn't even mention, that's how momentous last week was. I haven't even mentioned the rate hike yet. Right, and I'm going to have to cut this short, but the rate hike, while fully quote-unquote priced in, the market is still starting to get comfortable with the idea that the Fed is going to raise rates, and it doesn't matter what the economic data looks like. The stock market continues to rise, the Fed's going to continue to raise rates, because the Fed does not want to be blamed for causing a bubble in stocks, and so they're trying to prick that bubble, and it's not working. What it's doing is it's creating capital flight into the U.S. dollar. By doing so, it's going to, and causing a contraction of the yield curve, causing a flattening of the yield curve as short-term rates rise slower than long-term rates. Now we got long-term rates are crashing, short-term rates are rising, and we've got a flattening of the yield curve because now the market is expecting inflation expectations are falling, and therefore the market is expecting a recession, which is here. But the issue is still going to be whether or not a recession in the United States causes a complete collapse of the global economy. And with all the dollar-denominated debt out there, doesn't the dollar still go through a super cycle high? And once we lose faith in our institutions, i.e. they impeach Trump, they try to go to war with Russia for nothing. They tried to scuttle Brexit. We had massive abstentions and low voter turnout in the French parliamentary elections, second round of the French parliamentary elections over the weekend. These are the big themes. These are the issues that are at hand. And this is the stuff that's going to move capital markets in ways that very few people are expecting. The dollar bears are all wet. There may be another small move down in the dollar, but there's no way that with the way the euro is trading, that's going to move above $1.13 anytime soon. And if it does, it will not be sustainable for more than a week, because the smart money knows that dollars are where people need to be in order to service their debt, because there's just an enormous amount of it out there. All right, that's what I've got for today. You guys take care. And keep your stick on the ice.